Daniel Mercer sat at the edge of his worn kitchen table, staring at a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. He didn't mind. Cold coffee suited his mood these days, lukewarm, indifferent, and heavy with memories he couldn't seem to shake. The house around him was silent, save for the distant hum of a refrigerator and the occasional call of gulls outside the window. He had learned long ago to find peace in silence, though tonight the quiet felt different, hollow, accusing almost. June, his daughter, was upstairs. She should have been asleep, but like her father, she had a restless energy, a mind that refused to settle. Daniel remembered when she was small, maybe 5 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with her coloring books, watching him with that sharp, curious gaze he couldn't quite place. Even then, she noticed everything. It had started innocently enough. Life, Daniel thought, rarely begins with grand moral failings. It begins with survival. After the accident, after losing his wife in a sudden, careless car crash, Daniel had been left alone with June. She was only 3 at the time. He was a father not by choice but by circumstance, and he quickly realized that the world wasn't kind to single parents. Compassion was rare. People were selective with their attention and generosity. Most of all, Daniel knew that life didn't forgive weakness, so he taught her. Not in overt lessons or lectures, children hated that, but in subtle ways, in the quiet shaping of perspective. He taught her to read people, to notice what they wanted and needed, to see the invisible gaps between their words and their intentions. And when she asked why, Daniel told her the plain truth. People were soft, foolish, and often driven by the stories that made them feel better about themselves. "You see, June," he had said once, watching her tiny fingers curl around a pencil, "stories matter more than facts. If you can tell the right story, people will give you what you need, sometimes even before you ask." June absorbed it all. Children absorb the world like sponges, and Daniel had unwittingly poured bitterness into hers. At first, it was harmless, little tricks to get extra cookies to avoid punishment, to charm a teacher into leniency. But by the time she was 8, her talent surpassed her father's casual guidance. She could read a room, a face, a mood with precision. She understood subtle manipulation as a kind of craft, a puzzle to solve. Daniel both marveled and recoiled. There was pride, yes, but also a creeping unease. Pride that a child could be clever is natural. Pride that a child could be clever in ways that skirted morality? That weighed differently. By the time June was 13, she had turned their small-town existence into a series of performances. Friends' parents were charmed by her, shopkeepers convinced to offer discounts or freebies, neighbors touched by her apparent empathy. All the while, Daniel watched from the shadows, half amused, half concerned. He had given her the tools, but she wielded them with an artistry he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about mastery. The tipping point came on a rainy Thursday. Daniel had been struggling with an article he was writing, a freelance piece that barely paid the bills. He walked into the living room to find June, notebook in hand, pretending to be distraught over a classmate who needed help. She left the house moments later, and an hour after, a check arrived in the mail from a local family she had approached. Daniel didn't even know how she had convinced them. The speed, the subtlety, the elegance. It was all there. And as he looked at her retreating back, the storm washing over the streets outside, a sudden chill crept over him. He had created something he couldn't control. The next years blurred in a strange mix of admiration and horror. June's manipulations became more sophisticated. High school was a landscape of influence. Teachers, classmates, even local business owners. She could turn situations to her advantage without ever appearing selfish or cruel. The money she earned was secondary. The real reward was Daniel's quiet approval. She wanted it more than anything, And Daniel, in turn, began to see the reflection of himself he hadn't realized he was leaving behind. Every tactic he had used, every subtle lesson in cynicism, had become a part of her identity. She was smarter, sharper, and perhaps colder than he had ever been. One evening, he found himself in the attic, sifting through boxes of memories. Photos of June as a toddler, her mother's smile frozen in time, old newspaper clippings of his articles. He sat down on a dusty trunk and let the memories wash over him. "You've done well," he whispered, almost to himself. But it wasn't pride that filled him. It was sorrow. It took months of reflection for Daniel to understand what had to happen. Leaving June was the hardest decision he would ever make, not out of hatred, not because he didn't love her, he did more than anything, but because love sometimes required sacrifice. He needed to give her a chance at a life not shaped by the shadows he had cast. The morning he left, June was asleep. Daniel packed lightly, leaving only a note. "June, I've done what I could, but the rest is yours to shape. Be careful with your power. Be kind when you can. Love, Dad." He didn't know what would become of her. He feared she would continue on the path he had laid, perhaps even outpacing him in darkness. But he also hoped she might choose differently, forge a life defined not by manipulation, but by skill, empathy, and conscience. Walking down the road to catch the early bus out of town, Daniel didn't look back. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift slightly. The house behind him was silent, but no longer oppressive. He carried a strange mixture of grief, guilt, and hope, knowing that sometimes the most profound acts of love are invisible, quiet, and painful. Years later, Daniel heard whispers of June's exploits, how she had become a skilled negotiator, a clever entrepreneur, a young woman capable of extraordinary influence. He wondered if she remembered the lessons he had taught. He hoped she did, but more than that, he hoped she remembered the note. The moral of their story was not about cleverness or survival. It was about legacy, what we teach those we love, intentionally or not, and the invisible cost of passing on our own shadows. Daniel realized that raising a child was not only about protection or provision, but about discernment, restraint, and above all, conscience. Sometimes he thought love is measured not by what you give, but by what you leave behind, and what you choose to leave out. If you enjoyed this story, click subscribe to get new videos and don't miss our next story.